please learn this lesson before you have no choice but to learn it. Okay? This is one of those things where if there's ever a time to learn from somebody else's experience, you do it so you don't have the experience yourself. Okay? The blessings that God has for you, the favor that is on your life, the things God has planned for you, it's for the authentic version of yourself, not your representative. Like, I set thresholds, I gave God timelines, I gave him some rules and regulations. I gave him a 10-page dissertation on, how I felt like this season of my life should go and how I wanted the wilderness, and some great suggestions on some things that he can really do in my life and some ways that he can move. And he completely tore it up and burnt it in front of me and said, anyway, when you speak to the inner child in a person that was hurt, that's causing them to show up as a lesser version of who God created them to be, or causing them to show up as a nonchalant person, causing them to show up with this mask, with this wall up. When you speak to the inner child inside of them that they are protecting, that's when the walls come down. So people always talk about becoming the best version of yourself, and it seems like a bed of roses and adding habits and changing your hair and glowing up and looking nice and all of these things. But it's more of an internal process, an internal shift. And there are a lot of things that comes with being the best version of yourself that nobody really talks about. So I'm going to share with you some of the things that I have learned in the last 2 years of being in a wilderness season with God and going to that next level in my life, and things that completely unraveled me, things that shook me, how God took me beyond my threshold, and all the things that I have learned that have truly changed me and humbled me. Okay, and how it truly made me a better person. And I will also give you a warning. Some of these things, if you could learn from my experience so you don't have to deal with it yourself, now would be the time. I'm going to tell you some things that you will want to learn it from my experience and not learn it the hard way by going through it yourself. Okay, so take notes, because I'm going to be very honest, very vulnerable, very raw in this episode about some real things that I have learned, how God has unraveled me and turned me every which way but loose. So let us get into the episode. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the show. I'm your host, Sensi, and on this podcast we talk about taking accountability for your life to become the best version of yourself. Before we get into the episode, I just want to briefly apologize for my inconsistency. I have been thinking about some things, just things regarding the show, like the future of the show, what I want to do, that type of thing. I have not really finalized anything, so I don't have any announcements that I want to make. I'm still thinking. So yeah, and when I'm not sure, I don't really like to just come and speak or just randomly say things. And yeah, I was just feeling slightly disconnected from some of my content, so I just had to think things through. But what I can say is, if I ever don't have anything to say, I will do better about scheduling like a recap so y'all aren't left hanging. But as far as I'm concerned, at least for the next week, we will be back to regular scheduled programming, and hopefully I have some announcements to make, because I'm also working on some things behind the scenes. But today I just want to talk about some of the things that I have learned, some of the things that I wish somebody told me when I decided to really commit to being the best version of myself, especially recently. If you follow me on Substack, if you're subscribed to my Substack, you would see that I've been sharing a lot of the behind the scenes of my 100-day lock-in that I started at the end of September. And I really feel like I have really been changing and learning so much. A lot has happened, a lot is happening, a lot is about to happen ever since I started. And I just want to share some of the things that I have learned in the process, not just in the last 30 days or so, but more so in the last 2 years, when I really decided to focus on going to that next level in my life. But I'm going to be sharing 6 things that I learned, 6 things that nobody tells you when you decide to be the best version of yourself. So the first thing, and I did not realize this initially, but in hindsight, in reflection, I realized that's what was happening. That's what I was doing. And now I'm more intentional about it. But when we talk about becoming the best version of yourself, it really comes down to an identity shift. Meaning, there is a version of you, the version of you that you are today has a certain perception of the world and of yourself. You have certain beliefs, things you believe about yourself, your circumstances, your life, relationships, life in general. And from that comes your habits. From that comes how you interact with people. Like, it all stems from your identity. And I realized that every single time that I leveled up in my life, every single time that I became a different person, every single time things got better for me or I stepped into a new phase in my life, it was as a result of an identity shift. It was a result of intentionally changing my beliefs and aligning my life with the things that I wanted at that point in time. And it's no different for me right now. So the very first thing is that when you want to become the best version of yourself, it's quite literally an identity shift. And that's why in my course, Upgrade Your Standard, that is literally the first thing we focus on, literally shifting your identity to align with the best version of yourself who has the things you want to have. And then from there, you start creating the life you want. The second thing, and brace yourself, okay? Brace yourself for what I'm about to say. But I realized that I was not perfect. I know. Sit down, take a seat if you need to, pause and take a few deep breaths. But I realized that I was not perfect, and you likely are not perfect too. So the second thing is you are going to discover all of the ugly parts about yourself, all of the bad things, all of the toxic traits, all of the petty behaviors, all of the things that you likely need to, cut out. When you decide to be committed to being the best version of yourself, you are going to discover all of the things about you that are not so great. And that is something that God has apparently been intentionally, showing me about myself. And, I was very surprised by a few things. I was very surprised by a few things, not in the sense that I actually thought I was perfect, but in the sense of, here's the thing. Some of y'all probably realize this by now, but the reason why I have a whole podcast, the reason why I can talk about so many things, the reason why I'm good at explaining certain things and breaking down certain concepts and, the BTS of becoming the best version of yourself and all of that. The reason why I'm very good at that is because I had a tendency to intellectualize my emotions, okay? And what that means is that, say I go through something traumatic in the past, right? Okay, because God has done a good work in me. But in the past, what I would tend to do is I would pretty much just move on with my life, or acknowledge it from an intellectual standpoint, cover what is going on in my head, reflect and all of these things, acknowledge it and say, oh, you know what? This affected me this way and this affected me that way. And I see that trait came from this thing. And you know what? That made me feel this type of way. I don't really agree with this. I don't really agree with that. This is my stance on this. I see how this affected my life, yada, yada, yada. But I rarely ever took the time to feel. I rarely ever took the time to feel how something made me feel. I could explain what I imagined it made me feel like. I could explain how it affected me. I could explain, I could get to the root of something, talk about the origins and trace it. I could trace an unfavorable behavior about myself back to the root of where it started. But I was not very good at actually sitting with my feelings and allowing them to do what they do. And as a result, right, I think that caused me to have a lot of things that were like hidden beneath the surface that God saw fit to bring up. And in Him bringing these things up, it was a very uncomfortable experience because I was not used to actually feeling things. I was not used to actually sitting in the thought and the emotions of how that thing made me feel in the moment and like crying or feeling it. And this is over the last 2 years, by the way. So God started doing that with me 2 years ago. And He has been unpacking a lot of things beneath the surface and forcing me to sit in how things made me feel. So it's not enough to say, this happened some time ago and it made me feel a certain type of way and this is how it affects me today. No, He was like, you need to actually sit in how these things made you feel, because when you don't sit with your feelings, when you just bury things or you intellectualize everything and you play it out in your head, but you don't allow yourself to feel it, there's a lot of emotions that are locked inside of you. They become stored inside of you, inside your heart, and that alters who you are. That changes who you are. That's why you have so many people walking around nonchalant and being like a shell of themselves and saying, I will never trust anybody again, and I will never, this and that, and, being selfish and putting themselves first and all of these things. That's what happens when you go through something, somebody hurts you or something painful happens in your life and you never give yourself the time to actually feel it. You just move on. So that's kind of how I lived my life for the most part. And then in the last 2 years, God decided that, Sensi, you have a lot that you need to actually feel. And so He was bringing these things out. And when He started bringing these things out and I started feeling things, it was very overwhelming, but it made me see how it changed me. It made me see how there were so many parts of myself that was very much flawed, and not just flawed, but flawed in a way where it really affected how I showed up in relationships, like all types of relationships. And it affected my ability in some cases to even have, how do I say this, compassion for people in a specific area, not in general. Okay, I'm not a very apathetic person. In specific situations, like for example, in the past I shared with y'all how I have been like very hyper independent. I'll just be honest with y'all. I've shared with y'all in the past how I've been very hyper independent and like doing everything myself, and like, I have a problem, let me go fix it, blah, 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 blah. Well, that was one of the things that God decided to unpack, and it was very rough. It was very rough because He had me sit with exactly why I felt that way. He had me sit with the feeling of all of the times where I felt really alone in certain things that I had to deal with myself. And in doing that, he made me realize how it made me become somebody who did not really know how to show up when things were not perfect in my life. Because in the same episode I talked about hyper independence, I also talked about how when you become the person that, when you were the person that nobody checked on because they assume you would have everything figured out, you become the person that you kind of get isolated and you kind of just disappear from the picture because you got used to, or I got used to, every time there was a problem in my life, I have to go away and solve it. I genuinely, for the life of me, I'm not even joking, I did not know how to like be present if I had a problem, because I got so used to people letting me figure things out on my own. It became my norm. it became my default. And so anytime I had a problem, I would just, like slip away and try to figure it out and then come back when I figure it out. If it's something that takes like a huge mental and emotional toll for me and I'm not really able to be present for people because it's taking so much from me, if it would ever get to that point, then I would like slip away to deal with it and then show up when I feel better. And God literally unpacked all of that in me, and he had me sit with how it felt to be that way for most of my life. And I completely unraveled. I completely unraveled. I was an absolute mess. And long story short, after that, I really took a hard look at myself, at how it affected my relationships, not just in terms of my absence when something was wrong with me, but also in terms of knowing that I played a part in having shallow relationships in a sense, because I never really allowed people to be there for me because I was so used to being there for myself, you know? And so when he made me see that and, I became undone, it was hard in the moment. But what I realized, what I've been realizing, what I realized a long time ago with God is that every time he makes me feel something, like actually feel something that was blocking my heart, immediately after I let those emotions out, I always feel 10 times better. And the tension and the friction I had around doing whatever those emotions caused me to not do, it's not there anymore. So now I've been really like being more vulnerable with the people in my life and like showing up imperfect and saying, like this is how it is. This is who I am. It is what it is. And it's been very refreshing to see people show up for me, because I don't think that people genuinely would have never showed up for me. I think I made that assumption to protect myself so that I would not get hurt and feel rejected when I'm already low. So I just said, you know what, I'm not even going to put myself in a position to let somebody actively tell me, no, figure it out by yourself. I just defaulted to figuring things out by myself. But that's just like one of the things that I learned about myself, which ties in with the second point of you are going to learn a lot of the ugly things about yourself, especially if you are working on yourself with God. If you are simply working on yourself by yourself, as somebody who has done both of them, working on myself by myself, like reflecting, journaling, all of these things, and then working on myself with God, letting him take control. What I can tell you is when you decide to work on it with God, brace yourself, okay? Because you know that scripture that talks about how God sees the heart, like he knows what's going on in your heart. I'm paraphrasing. He truly knows what's going on in your heart, even when you don't. So you might think everything is cool, but he's like, you know what, actually you have a lot of bitterness and resentment and unforgiveness in your heart, and it's affecting your ability to love people the way I called you to. So we actually need to unpack that right now. That's what it's like becoming the best version of yourself with God in control. He will lay you out. He will air out your dirty laundry. Fortunately in private, because he loves you and it's for your good, but he will air you out. He will wring you out. He will put you through fire. You know that song, I Want to Be Tried by Fire? Side note, I was listening to gospel music on Amazon. I just let a playlist go, like a random playlist, and that song came on, I Want to Be Tried by Fire Purified. And I was so triggered, I said, Alexa, change the song. Because at this point, I don't even want, I'm not going to ask for it. He'll do it anyway. I'm not going to ask for it. I just felt bad vibes from that song, but I digress. So that is the second thing. becoming the best version of yourself is not about an external glow up. It's not about, just changing your habits and routines. It's truly becoming better from the inside out. And in order to do that, you are going to face the ugly parts about yourself. You are going to have to heal. You are going to have to deal with the things that affect how you show up. You are going to have to deal with the things that cause you to have shallow relationships. You are going to have to face yourself, right? Point blank, period. There's no way around it, especially with God, because let me tell you, I have I have surrendered, still dying to my flesh every day, but I have surrendered my life to God, and like the process of becoming the best version of myself, being the best version of myself, I have put him in control of that, and I truly feel like he has been dragging me. It's for my good. Like I can look back in hindsight and see how it has changed me and how it has shaped me, and how I can see all the good in hindsight, but the process is not fun. It's not fun. When you are becoming the best version of yourself from the inside out and God is in control, he will literally like turn your heart inside out and show you all of the things that are affecting how you show up in the world until you get it out so he can use you. And I really hope he is satisfied, because I need a break. But I digress. Let us move on to number 3 before I get triggered. The third thing complements number 2. The third thing is becoming the best version of yourself. A lot of the time, I would say it's about removing things more than it is adding things. One thing I've learned is that the blessings that God has for you, the favor that is on your life, the things God has planned for you, it's for the authentic version of yourself, not your representative. It's not for who you pretend to be. It's not for who you show up as. It's not for who you it's not for, the person that the mask that you put on to perform when you do certain things. It's for who you are authentically. Now, the issue with that, as we've been discussing actually, is that when you go through certain situations in life, like traumatic events or pain, heartbreak, loss, all types of things, that changes you if you let it. If you don't address it, if you don't feel how you feel in the moment and decide to let it go, these things can change you when you hold on to the pain. And all of these things affect your ability to be authentic. I made a post a few days ago, I think yesterday actually, about how when I had the fear of being seen, which is what I talked about in my very first YouTube video, when I had the fear of being seen, I realized that the reason why I was so afraid to show up and put myself out there is because I had trauma from people like always teasing me about certain things, about my size, like being skinny. Growing up in the Caribbean is nothing to brag about, honestly. People ask me if I'm a model now that I live in America, but growing up back home, it was nothing. Yeah. So and and if you don't know, let me just tell you, with Caribbean people, when you come across one of us, it's like the first thing we'll do is greet you. The second thing is make a comment on your weight. Is make a comment on your body. Are you gaining weight? Are you losing weight? Is your face looking fat? Is your stomach getting bigger? Like that's just how it is. And so I dealt with that for like most of my life growing up back home. And it's not the only thing that led to like a fear of being seen, but it's one of the things, because every time I would meet people, every time I would come across people, or just sometimes in school, people would always tease me about that. And so I feel like at one point I felt like I anticipated it from everybody, and I really dreaded it. And I tried to really not draw attention to myself at one point, because I was just so tired, because anytime any type of attention was drawn to me, that's the first thing that people would comment on. And so I think that's one of the things that affected me. There were other things, but I'll only talk about that one. I think that's one of the things that affected me. But the thing is, God wanted me to have a podcast. He wanted me to have a platform. He wanted me to use my voice. If I feel like when I put myself out there, when there's attention on me, that it will lead to me being teased or bullied or, dealing with always unsolicited comments about my appearance, about my body, etc., then, it's something that I did not want to deal with. But that experience led to me creating some type of fear that was affecting what God wanted to do, what God wanted to use me for. Now, in order for me to be used, I have to get rid of such fear, which means I have to face the thing causing the fear and deal with that, etc., etc., etc. But my point is, all of it is about removing the things that cause you to be a shell of yourself. It's about removing the things that lead to the fears that make you afraid of doing the things God called you to do. It's about removing the things that give you the fears about having healthy relationships and trusting people and putting yourself out there and being a kind, loving person just because you are a kind, loving person, and not holding that back and restricting yourself because you've been taken for granted so often, or people have hurt you, people have played you, you've been heartbroken, all of these things. When we go through all of that trauma, it makes us a shell of ourselves because we hold on to that pain, and it tells you, you can never love like that again. You can never trust somebody like that again. You can never speak out again because it led to this pain, and we don't want any more of that pain. So a lot of becoming the best version of yourself is having to unpack and remove all of these things that threaten your authenticity, right? If we talk about content creation specifically, since that's what I'm doing right now, a lot of times people on, let's say, TikTok, right, on social media, people want to create content, but then as soon as the camera comes on, they perform, right? And I've had my fair share of doing that too. So I'm not speaking at anybody, I'm speaking from experience. But when the camera comes on, sometimes you perform because you feel like, okay, well, this thing or that trend is going viral and I want my content to do well. So maybe if I hop on the trend, it will do well. Or maybe if I come online and I speak like the influencers, the influence, like, how they talk, you probably know what I'm talking about. There's a certain way that certain influencers talk, the way they drag out words, and they're like, so I just like it, what I'm talking about, right? Sometimes people come online and as soon as the camera turns on, the mask comes on. They start performing immediately. And that's what I mean when I say sometimes it's about removing things, because you have to remove all of those things that makes you feel like you cannot be your authentic self. Your authenticity is not good enough to get views, or it's not good enough to reach people. It's not good enough to resonate with people. But the fact of the matter is, what I've learned, what I'm still learning, is that the people that God called you to serve, whether it's with content, whether it's with a business, whether it's with your art, whether it's with your job, the people that God called you to serve, the place where you are going to thrive, that prosperity, that abundance, these blessings, they require your authenticity. These blessings are reserved for who you truly are, not who you pretend to be, right? Not the version of you show up as when the camera turns on. Not the version of you feel like you have to be to get views. Not the version of you feel like you have to be to do well at your job. And I say that kind of lightly because I've been in corporate America. I know what it's like to not really fully show up as yourself. So I know that space can kind of be hard, but I remember I did my best to do it in a professional, respectable way, of course. When I was at my job, let me tell you, I still had the same personality where I would crack jokes. I would still be very sarcastic. I would still be me, but professional me. So certain things was off limits, but use your discretion. But the blessings that God has stored up for you is reserved for who you authentically are, not who you pretend to be. So as long as you're pretending, you are going to get crumbs. Okay? As long as you're pretending, you're going to get crumbs. And then you're also going to feel out of alignment because you're not going to recognize the person that you show up as. You remember when I started the episode, I said I was thinking about things and things. That's one of the things I was talking about. Because if you follow my Substack, you know that ever since I started my 100-day lock-in, I have been working on myself, and I shared some of my goals, but I didn't share all of my goals. Some things I'm keeping to myself. But I'm in the middle of, like an identity shift. And anytime you decide to change your identity, anytime you decide to go to that next level, there's going to be some dissonance, cognitive dissonance with your current environment because it will no longer align with who you are becoming. And so when I was thinking about my podcast, I was just thinking about like how I show up online and certain things. And let me just be very blunt. Let me just be very blunt. I was looking at my YouTube videos. I was looking at, my thumbnails and stuff. And I'm just like, I don't want to be this person. I was like, I don't want to be this person anymore. I don't know if it's because I turned 28 this year, but I was like, I'm approaching 30. I really don't care to have thumbnails, like the aesthetic thumbnails and all of that. And the thing is, sometimes YouTube will not push out, the other stuff. Like people complain about how all of the thumbnails and stuff on YouTube look the same, but on one end it's like you're authentic, but on the other end there's also strategy and stuff that has to be factored in, and it's finding that healthy middle ground. But I don't know, I've just been thinking about that. But the thing is, I'm not a graphic designer, so I just like I really don't like doing graphic design and doing all of that stuff. So it's something that I have to outsource. But I was just looking at my thumbnails and I was like, I really don't care to like do all of that anymore. I want to do something that's aligned with my new identity. So I was just really rethinking a lot of things, and yeah, so we'll see how that goes. But expect some changes. Now, the fourth thing is expect a season of isolation and separation and unfamiliarity. Expect a season where you feel out of place. Like I said, the first thing when you're becoming the best version of yourself, ultimately, if you really want to do it right, it takes an identity shift. And I walk you through how to effectively do that to go to the next level in my course. But when you are doing an identity shift, you are changing your mindset, your habits, your beliefs. You are literally becoming a new person. You are becoming that person at that next level. And so you are not going to be able to align with a lot of the things in your current reality that don't align with that. And it's going to make you feel very out of place. I have been through many seasons of isolation and separation in my life. Some may have been self-induced. That's my business. Okay. But anytime God was advancing me, anytime I was preparing to step into something new that I wanted, I always went through a season of separation and isolation. And at this point, I'm used to it. I understand it's part of the process. So I'm just going to prepare you. If you are in the process of changing your life, especially as we come to the close of the year or in the new year, because, everybody wants to do that as soon as January rolls around. But if you are in the process of that, expect a wilderness season. Expect a season of separation. Expect a season where a lot of things feel unfamiliar, including relationships. And it doesn't always mean that these things or these people are bad. It could just mean that that season is up, right? There have been so many times I shared with y'all years ago. I think this was back when I was 24. I shared with y'all around that time I was in a season of separation where God removed the need to drink. And I used to drink before socially, not heavy, but, I would participate in drinking. And all of a sudden, I lost the taste for it. And then I felt so isolated when I would go in the same environments and there was an expectation for me to drink and I didn't. And some people took that personally. Why? I don't know. But literally, at this point, I have come to expect it. I'm just letting you know that when you decide to be the best version of yourself, just know that there will be a season where a lot of things feel unfamiliar. If it does not align with your new identity, there's going to be some friction. There is going to be some tension. It is going to feel unfamiliar, and you are going to have to wrestle with, am I going to hold on to this or am I going to let it go so that I can step into that next version of myself. Some things you have to let go of, some things or people you might have to put distance in between you and them, and some things will require you to intentionally put effort to bring it into that new season with you, because it's not always on the other things or the other people. It could require more intentionality from you, because you have to show up a different way and you have to communicate maybe your new standards, your new boundaries, etc., or how you feel about certain things. You have to communicate the change that you are going through and give people or things, people mainly, the option to decide, are you cool with that? Are you coming with me? Or is this the end of the road? Right? And these things are always uncomfortable. These situations are always uncomfortable. Believe me, I don't like them. But it's necessary, because one thing I have learned is that when it comes to relationships, the relationships that actually drain you the most are the ones you have on ice, the ones that are on limbo, the ones where that's not your enemy, but that's not necessarily your close friend. It's like, are we good? Are we not? Mm-hmm. How do I feel? Like, that takes so much energy. That takes so much mental energy. That takes so much of your capacity that you really can't afford to leave these relationships in limbo. You will have to make a decision. Is this coming with me, or is this the end of the road? So that's what I mean when I say some things will require an intentional lift from you, intentional effort. You have to communicate, you have to resolve it. You cannot just leave things on ice. And I think that's one of the things that, if I'm being honest, I think that's one of the things that I learned, one of the valuable lessons that I learned in this season of my life over the last 2 years is, do not leave things on limbo. Do not leave things on limbo. I think I left a lot of things on limbo, and fortunately, God gave me clarity in all of these areas, to the point where there's nothing on limbo in my life. There is nobody that I'm unsure of. The people who are in my life, I love and I care about very much, and I can give them my full attention. And I can also show up as this version of myself who is more vulnerable, who is more open, and who has new plans for how I want to show up in relationships, the type of person that I want to be, the type of friend that I want to be, the type of family member that I want to be, etc. And I'll explain more of that in my other points. But now there's nothing in limbo where I feel like I have to reserve anything or show up as different versions of myself because people are different. Now it's like God gave me the clarity and the gift of giving me some genuine people in my life that I can feel 100% comfortable with as this version of myself. And I'm truly grateful for that. Truly, truly, truly grateful for that. Do not underestimate how keeping things in limbo will rob you of your peace. Do what you need to do. Okay? But you will go through that season of separation and isolation and unfamiliarity where you will have to do an essential audit of not just your life, but your energy. Really assess how you feel about certain things. How do you feel about certain people after you talk to them? How do you feel about certain projects when it's time to do it? Does it make you excited? Does it make you happy? Or do you feel drained? Do you feel like you would rather do quite literally anything else? You have to address those things, right? Use that season of separation and isolation, not just to remove the things that God wants to remove, but to also do that audit to assess and address everything that is in limbo in your life. People, places, things, whatever. Address all of it. Do not waste that season of isolation and separation. It will likely be very uncomfortable. It will likely be very hard enough as it is. Like, just rip the band-aid off and assess everything that is in limbo and do what you need to do. Okay? Now, number 5 and 6 are really like lessons that I learned in that season of my life that I'm so grateful for. But let's get into it. Number 5. What I learned is that you really have to learn how to detach and stay detached. You should not be attached to anything but God. Okay, I learned that the hard way. Let me tell you something. If you ever want to spare yourself of strife, confusion, turmoil, emotional distraught, please listen to what I'm saying and don't let the Lord teach you this lesson for yourself. If you take nothing, please learn this lesson before you have no choice but to learn it. Okay? This is one of those things where if there's ever a time to learn from somebody else's experience, you do it so you don't have the experience yourself. Okay? But you really need to learn how to detach from everything in your life that is not God. Let me explain what that means. Now, when I have not watched many videos on detachment, but I think my perspective of it from what I've heard is people just talking about like not caring about anything and yada yada yada. That's not what I'm talking about. Let me explain what I'm talking about. When I say to stay detached and don't cling to anything but God, this is what I mean. You have to learn, first and foremost, to never let your feelings, your emotions, your self-worth, nothing about yourself ever be dependent on anything that can be taken away from you. People, places, things, never attach any form of who you are or your emotions to anything that can be taken away from you. And do not attach your self-worth, your identity, or anything to whatever your job is or your career or your assignment. Let me unpack these two things in depth. So the first is don't attach yourself to anything that can be taken away from you. I have had so many instances in my life where I have been attached to things and I went through like emotional hell or intellectual, that's my business. I have had so many situations where I have went through some things because they were taken away from me and I was attached to it. Starting with number one, my home. I left St. Lucia when I was 16. I left in Form 5, I believe. The first few months in Form 5, I did not get to graduate. I did not get to go to prom with my friends, and I was very upset about that. I absolutely did not want to leave when I left, but I didn't really have a choice. In hindsight, I don't regret it. However, I can tell you in that moment, I spent, I think the first year that I was in America, I spent the first year like pretty much depressed, sulking, just irritated. I didn't even try to make friends. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I just wanted to be by myself. Like I was so butthurt, and I remember being so upset when my old school prom came around because I wanted to go to prom with my friends, and I was absolutely sickened watching the pictures. I don't even think I watched the pictures. I think I stayed offline that whole day because I was so upset that I didn't get to go. But all of that was because I was attached to that place. Now, home will always be home. But what I'm saying is being attached to that place caused me to have such a drastic reaction when I left that if I wasn't so attached, or if I allowed the opportunity for a new experience instead of being so attached to where I was from, I would have had a better experience when I just came. It didn't drastically change my life or, make things, like extremely bad or anything, but the experience could have been a lot easier. Like I was so upset. I didn't even take yearbook pictures in the high school I went to for like a year. I didn't even take yearbook pictures. I didn't do a thing to be a part of that school because that's how mad and upset I was that I didn't get to graduate with my friends that I spent all 4.5 years of my teenage life in school with, right? It's because I was so attached that I had such an adverse reaction when I left. And because of everything that has happened in my life since then, I don't even regret leaving. But I'm trying to explain to you, it's because there was an attachment. It dictated how I experienced that new season of my life in the beginning. Another example is like with people. When you attach yourself to people, you make, I don't know, let's say like somebody you're dating, you make that person your whole identity or something. Like you just get extremely attached to them. You don't have an identity of your own outside of them. Like that becomes your entire personality. You just you just become, I'm sorry, a very insufferable person. A very insufferable person, right? Hard to be around. Hard to be around as somebody who's been on the receiving end of it. Hard to be around. But like, it doesn't serve you, because what happens if that person leave? Now you fall apart. Why? You were a whole person without them, right? You had a whole life without them. When you love yourself and you have things going on in your own life and you see somebody as an addition or a bonus, an extension to yourself versus filling a void that you have, or, just like being extremely desperate, you don't have that unhealthy attachment where you literally might feel like your life is falling apart. And I'm not like minimizing heartbreak and these types of things, but I'm just saying like you can have an unhealthy attachment to a person that makes you completely lose your mind when they leave, or at the thought of them leaving, so much so that you compromise and you become a shell of yourself, and you accept things that nobody should ever accept because you're attached to that person, right? But they can leave. What happens if they die? God forbid. What are you going to do? You see what I mean? And another thing is, I told y'all years ago, before I started my podcast, I actually had a blog that I started in college that did really well. And the blog was a college blog. I blogged about college things. So when I graduated from college, I no longer wanted to blog about college things. But I was so attached to that blog, and I honestly went through a period where I was kind of disappointed and having a hard time letting it go, because I felt like I was a failure. Because at one point I really wanted to do it, and I really wanted it to blossom into something that was even bigger than it was. I was so attached to it that when God asked me to let it go, I had a hard time. Like, I spent maybe like a month or two just feeling like, wow, it's not the thing. Like I feel so sad that it's not what I want to do anymore. When once upon a time I was so convinced that this is what I wanted to do. And eventually I sold it, and then God asked me to start a podcast, and now I love the podcast. But what I learned from that lesson is that I cannot be attached to the podcast, even because what if God says, I don't want you to do a podcast anymore. I want you to do this thing instead. You see what I mean? I cannot be so attached to the podcast, which is the assignment, the current assignment, that when it's time for God to put me in a different assignment, give me a different assignment, that I'm disobedient because I attached myself to this thing. I am simply a vessel that he wants to use, right? I'm simply a vessel that he asks to yap a few times a week. But I cannot be attached to that, because if he calls me to something else, I don't want to be disobedient, because I'm like, but God, what about the podcast? Use me however you want to use me. You see what I mean? So that's what I mean when I say detach. Don't attach yourself to anything that can be taken. God can give you a different assignment. God can give you a different job. God can ask you to leave that relationship. God can ask you to move to a different city or a different country. If you attach yourself to these things that can be taken away from you, you are going to have a very hard time, and you are going to be disobedient and delay your blessings because you are attached to things that were only meant to stay for a season. And the second part of the detachment that I'm talking about is not letting anything dictate your emotions. I have learned in the last 2 years, with God, deciding that I need to go through a period of emotional instability and turmoil. One thing that I have learned, and I was just thinking about it the other day, I have learned to have joy in chaos. I have learned to have peace in chaos. I have learned to be in situations where I feel like things are burning down around me and I'm just chilling. Like, if God brought me to it, he'll bring me through it. And it doesn't mean that sometimes I'm not anxious. It doesn't mean that sometimes I'm not afraid. It doesn't mean that, I don't worry. It just means that if God brought me to it, he'll bring me through it. What good is it to lose my mind? What I realized is that the Israelites spent 40 years in the wilderness on what should have been an 11-day trip because of their complaining and murmuring and lack of faith. So I have learned to shut my mouth. Now, every now and then I might have something to say, but for the most part, part, okay, for the most part, I have learned to have joy and peace in chaos. I have learned to see things burning down around me and still praise God, still listen to worship, still watch a sermon, still sit and yap with Him about other things. Like, I have learned to have peace and joy in chaos. I have learned to not let my circumstances dictate my emotions. I have learned to have a level of faith that surprises me. I have learned to have a level of faith that even surprises me. Like, sometimes I'm just like, you really believe this thing? Like, you really do believe this thing? Like, you're really 100% convicted no matter what? Like, I have surprised myself. God has surprised me. God has surprised me because let me tell you, I I would say like a year ago, like since a year ago, I wanted to give up. Like, I'm a year past where I thought my threshold was with God. I am a year past it, and that really shocks me. Like, I set thresholds, I gave God timelines, I gave him some rules and regulations. I gave him a 10-page dissertation on, how I felt like this season of my life should go and how I wanted the wilderness, and some great suggestions on some things that he can really do in my life and some ways that he can move. And he completely tore it up and burned it in front of me and said anyway, and literally required me to trust him when I was initially losing my mind, until I got to a point where I'm like, it is what it is. What's next, Lord? Like, at this point, that song, that same song, Tried by Fire, Purified, that has been my life for the last 2 years. And I have learned to find peace and joy and still have a praise in the midst of the things that have absolutely stressed me out. And it really taught me to detach. Don't make my emotions dependent on how my life is going. Don't make my emotions dependent on what's happening around me, or whether or not my life looks exactly how I want it to look, right? Because life has ups and downs. There will be downs. There will be periods where you have to face a temporary setback. There will be periods where things are hard for a season, right? And you have to be able to still have peace, still have joy, not happiness, because joy is found in the Lord. Happiness is based on happenstance. Happiness is based on what's happening in your life. And most people rely on happiness and they never find joy in the Lord. And that's why they completely fall apart and unravel when they enter that season of setback or delay or being tried and purified, and like God washing some things, taking some things out of you. That's why some people lose their mind and they give up, because you made your happiness, you made happiness a priority instead of joy, and you made your good feelings and your self-worth and all of these things dependent on your circumstances. Your life needs to be a certain way in order for you to be happy. Your life needs to be a certain way in order for you to feel worthy, in order for you to feel like you have value, in order for you to feel like you can show up and be present. If things are not going perfect, if God is not answering your prayers, if you're not hitting certain milestones, you don't know how to show up. You don't know how to still feel worthy, still feel proud of yourself. You don't know how to be at peace when things aren't going exactly how you want them. And I have learned that that is such an unstable way to live. That is such an unstable way to live, because when you go through the downs that are promised, okay, God never lied about the fact that we will have to take up our cross and carry him. I think I hope that he would have, like, helped me carry it. Like he does, but I mean actually take it from me so I can walk freely. But that's not what the word says. Um, but yeah, like there will be times where you have to take up your cross. There will be times where he needs to purify you and he will say, okay, it's time to sit in how you feel and feel how you feel so you can get that bitterness out of your heart so I can use you and all of these things. And are you going to fall apart when life doesn't go how you want it to go? Are you going to fall apart when God doesn't adhere to your list of demands and suggestions and your 10-page dissertation? Because that's very unstable. That's what I've learned. And so I've learned to find joy and peace in the midst of whatever, to be honest. To not let my circumstances dictate my feelings. Now every now and then I still crash out. Okay, I'm not perfect. Every now and then I still crash out. But I get back to that point of peace. Okay, I've gotten a lot better at it. I know better now and I'm doing better. So that's what I mean by stay detached. Don't cling to anything but God, because God is the one constant that will always be in your life and in your death if you live your life right. But everything else can be taken. So stay detached, appreciate what you have, and just don't listen. Don't let God show you what I mean. Okay? Do your best to understand what I am saying and do your best to implement that in your life right now before you go through a season where you have to learn it the hard way. Okay? If I were you, I would, when you're done with this episode, I would go make a list of things that you are grateful for and just be in a space of gratitude. If I were you, even if you're in a bad season, I would just tell God that you are thankful that you are still alive, right? That you are still healthy. You might not have what you want, but you have your health. If you don't have your health, you're still alive. You have a roof over your head. Okay? Find something to be grateful for. Don't wait till you get sick to appreciate your health. Don't wait till you wake up and you can only breathe properly out of one nostril to appreciate your breath. Okay? Do not let God teach you that lesson the hard way. Okay? Trust me, you don't want him to. Last but not least, the last thing I will share, another thing that I have learned is that when you're in the process of becoming the best version of yourself, God-led ideally, you are going to learn what's really important. Your priorities are going to shift. Let me share what that looks like for me, since I'm in the process of that. I think this came about mainly because of the combination of everything that I just mentioned with the identity shift, God revealing my imperfections, showing me what needs to be removed, the season of isolation, like all the things I just mentioned. One of the things that I have learned, the key thing that I have learned is what was important to me. The things that are important to me changed. My priorities changed. I'll be very honest with you. As somebody who was hyper independent and in survival mode for a lot of my life, I definitely valued money, and in the sense that I believed that it gave freedom, which it does, right? But I think that I really spent a lot of time pursuing money, if I'm being honest, purely because I just never wanted to, I just wanted to get out of survival mode, you know? So I shared with y'all that my primary purpose for my accounting finance background was to work in a highly paid field, right? And I achieved that. And I think in the last 2 years, one of the things that has shifted for me is that I learned that it's not the most important thing. I mean, I didn't think it was the most important thing, but God just showed me that other things are more important as He really unpacked certain things and removed a lot of the things that were clogging up my heart and causing me to be a shell of myself in some ways. I have shifted my priorities. Am I still, working to make money? Absolutely. Because you cannot pay your bills with emotions, right? But it's not the priority. And I've also been shifting out of survival mode And what really changed for me, I'll be very honest with y'all, okay? I'm being very honest and vulnerable in this episode, but with all the things that God have been doing, right? One of the things that I realized, what shifted for me really was that I learned how important relationships are. Hear me out. When I was in that season of my life for quite some time, where I was in the whole cycle of, okay, something is wrong, disappear, go fix it, then come back. When I was in that season, I did not know, like I said, I really did not know how to let people help me. I much rather preferred to deal with a hard thing on my own and just let that be the hard thing that I deal with than deal with the hard thing on my own and ask for help and don't get the help. And now I'm dealing with the hard thing on my own, plus the rejection and the hurt of not getting help from somebody that I really wanted to help me, or just not getting help at all when I know I need help, but people don't think I need help because I do so well that people think I can always handle everything on my own. So in the process of God unpacking all of these things and bringing all of these things to light, after I, released those things, it's like I felt like a new person. I felt rebirthed. I felt like I was born again. I felt like a huge burden was lifted off of my chest, where now it's like, okay, if you need help, just ask for help. Okay, if you're going through a hard time or if you're in a vulnerable position, share it with the people in your life. I have learned, one of the things that I have learned in the last 2 months recently is that I would much rather have somebody disappoint me very soon to know that they are not there for me than to try to do everything by myself and then get to a point where I literally cannot go any further if I try to do things on my own, and then need help from somebody and then they don't help me, or something happens like in the worst season of my life. I would much rather deal with the disappointment early on. I would much rather know who in my life I can count on versus who I cannot count on. I would much rather learn that than to force myself to deal with everything on my own and rob myself of the community that I know I can have if I just allow myself to be vulnerable, right? And then also knowing who you can depend on and who you cannot depend on. In the process of God unpacking all of these things, helping me just be, more comfortable being vulnerable and all of these things. In the process of that, let me just tell you, when I was going through absolute hell, I got to a point in my life where God revealed to me why he was unpacking that specific issue of me trying to always do everything by myself and like run away and isolate myself and be a ghost until I resolve a problem and then come back. In the process of God dealing with that specific situation, it got to a point where I truly felt like if I did not ask for help, I would have died in the wilderness, okay? So to speak, hypothetically speaking, I would not have made it out. I was too overwhelmed mentally, emotionally. I was too exhausted. And it got to a point where God finally brought me to my knees, where he was like, you cannot keep living your life like this. And it was hard, but I'm so grateful, because here's the thing. When I finally got to that point, I brought myself to have a conversation with the people in my life. And for one, I had to first apologize for being absent, because when you're absent, people can interpret that in many different ways that you don't intend to, even when it has nothing to do with them, because lack of communication is never a good thing ever at all, right? And so the first thing I did was take accountability for my absence and really just be honest about where I was at. And to be honest, I wanted to see where people's head was at before I allowed myself to be vulnerable, because I really didn't have the capacity. And in me doing that, in me finally being honest to the people in my life that I was really struggling, I will never forget the compassion that I was met with by some of my friends. Let me tell you something. One of my friends literally made me cry because she had every right to be concerned that I just was not present. She had every right to feel how she felt at me being absent. But instead of doing that, she met me with compassion, and she was very eager to know, like, hey, are you okay? Are you actually okay? Like, this is not normal of you to just disappear and all of these things. Like, are you actually okay? Because people don't just disappear. And for me, it was like a slow, gradual decline. It wasn't something that happened overnight. It was something where God was just doing a little bit too much. God was just doing a little bit too much back to back in my life. And it was mentally and emotionally draining. And it led to a gradual decline where I just felt very exhausted. And I quite literally did not have the capacity for relationships or like anything. I really just wanted to just be by myself. And in that moment, when that friend had every right to be upset that I was not present, she met me with compassion and was very eager to like help me and be like, what's wrong and all of these things. And I'll never forget how that made me feel, because it felt so nurturing to my inner child, because let me tell you, I was so used to like figuring things out on my own that it really just became my default. It really just became my default to where it's something that if you know, and it doesn't have to be in this exact situation, but whenever you deal with anything that becomes your default, you quite literally don't consider the alternatives. It never occurred to me. It quite literally never occurred to me to ask for help. It never occurred to me until it was too late. And so to be met with compassion, it was like somebody nurturing my inner child at a time in my life where I felt so low and very condemned. And it was so refreshing because it reminded me of when God saved my life, when God initially came back for me. It was at a time where I was as big as up. I was atheist. I was going around telling Christians, you don't actually believe in this God, like trying to discredit the Bible and all of these things, always sharing like atheist quotes on my social media at the time. Like, that's who I was years ago when God came back for me. He quite literally could have left me. I quite literally cannot make a case as to why he should have saved my life, but he did. And in that moment, I learned that what truly changes, this sounds cliche, but what truly changes the world, what truly changes relationships, what really makes or breaks relationships and community is when people meet you with compassion at a time where you don't deserve it. That's literally the faith. That's literally the Christian faith. God sending his only son to die for us, knowing good and well that we would be a constant disappointment. Because, we have to fight our flesh every single day. And sometimes we backslide, sometimes we fail, but it's like he took all of that into consideration and he still loved us. And that's when I truly learned, that scripture that says love is patient, love is kind, it doesn't boast, it doesn't envy, it doesn't hold any record of, all of these things. Now, in that moment, it's like I got a revelation of why God tells us that as Christians, we should love one another. By this, all men will know that you are my disciple, by the way you love one another. That's why it's the commandment after putting God first. Love your God with all your hearts, all your soul, all your mind, and then love one another as you love yourself. That's why it's quite literally a commandment. It's because when you love somebody the way God calls you to love somebody, when you meet people with compassion at their lowest point or when they don't deserve it, that's actually what gets people to change, what softens people. And I'm not saying do that in abusive relationships, use your discretion, but it's often when people feel their lowest, when you speak to the inner child in a person that was hurt, that's causing them to show up as a lesser version of who God created them to be, or causing them to show up as a nonchalant person, causing them to show up with this mask, with this wall up. When you speak to the inner child inside of them that they are protecting, that's when the walls come down. That's when people feel like they have the space to be vulnerable and open with you, because you didn't respond to the wall. You didn't respond to the shell. You responded to their inner child that they're simply just trying to protect. And that's how it felt in that moment when I was met with compassion by the friends and the people who showed up for me in that moment when I finally just said, I'm struggling. That's how I felt in that moment, because it's like the me I became to protect that inner child was the person that didn't know how to ask for help, was the person that was very hyper independent, was the person that would always retreat when something was hard, because I know and I always felt that there was an expectation on me to deal with things by myself, because I'm the one people didn't have to worry about. I'm the one who has a good head on her shoulders. I'm the one who always makes the best of a situation, always does well eventually. And so because that expectation was always on me, that has been something that I've always had to do, like figure things out. And so it became my default, that wall, that shell of myself, to protect that younger version of me, that inner child that genuinely wanted to be helped, that genuinely did not want to like do everything on her own. The wall was who hurt people. The wall was who showed up in that moment, in that season of my life, where I genuinely just I genuinely just could not. I felt like I had to deal with things on my own. And the people in my life today have met me with compassion. They helped me. They showed up for me. They allowed me to talk and vent and all of these things. And I will forever be grateful for them, for nurturing my inner child in that moment and not making me feel like I had to do things alone, and for meeting me with compassion when I was wrong, for disappearing. And I know I went on a whole tangent, but basically all of that relates to my last point of you are going to understand what's truly important. I learned that what's truly important is the community around me, and the having people in your life that you can genuinely trust, having people in your life where you can say, that is my community, that is my village, not just somebody that I send memes to on social media, not just somebody that I only know what's going on in their life through updates on their Instagram or updates on their TikTok, or following them online, but not actually having a conversation with them or not actually seeing them in person. God has refined my relationships, and the people who are in my life, the people who met me with compassion, I literally did a 180, and I took the feedback and I took what God was trying to show me, and I said, you know what? I see what you're trying to tell me. Like, number one, you don't have to do everything on your own. And number two, it's very important to have people in your life that are not shallow, people in your life who will genuinely show up for you. The crazy thing is, I remember telling God, I think around last year, a year ago or something like that, how I really wanted to work on my relationships, like all of the relationships in my life, all kinds. I really wanted to work on my relationships and build a better community and a village to where I feel like I don't necessarily have to go out with people and have dinner and do all of the glamorous things, but I can just do like casual things and invite people to my home to like just watch TV, like just spend time with my family and these types of things. Like have a genuine community where people are willing to be inconvenienced for each other, like go out of your way to do stuff for other people. I remember sharing that with God. Like I really want to nurture a village like that where I can trust people and people can trust me. And I think I think he listened and he was like, all right, let's start with you. He said, let's start with you. Let's work on what you need to work on in order to do that. And he He really unpacked a couple of things so that I would be able to do that. And in hindsight, I am so grateful for it, because I can tell you my priorities have really shifted. I really pour a lot into my relationships now. And there are some things, other things that I'm working on implementing as well, but I really pour a lot more into my relationships now. Like when I was really looking at my life over the last 2 years and assessing everything, addressing everything, like reflecting on, what I learned, what it taught me, what are the things that I really value coming out of it. I realized that it was really the relationships of the people who were there for me at a time when I was at my lowest. And I realized that one of my favorite things in the midst of all of that was me going to my mom's house once a week to play with my sisters. If you don't know, I have twin sisters. They are 7 years old. They just turned 7 last month. And literally once a week, I'm at my mother's house, like running around like a child, literally playing hide and seek. A few days ago, I was there learning how to operate on their hoverboard. They thought it was funny. I didn't think it was funny. Okay, because I almost fell a few times. But like playing hide and seek, dragging each other up the stairs, carrying each other up the stairs, doing all of these things, like making up these random games on the spot, like, like playing makeshift games and stuff. Like literally once a week, I am a whole child. Once a week, I am a whole child. And it's something that I appreciate so much, because when you're around children, it's like my sisters don't care about my to-do list. They don't care about a bill. They don't care about a deadline. They don't know what it means to work. They just want to play. They just want to play. They just see me as their big sister and they just want to play. They call me every week asking me to come and they just want to play. Like, and it really just, like, it brings out the inner child in me, and it brings me to a place where nothing else in the world matters other than playing with my sisters, like just being a child. And when I really took inventory of my life, I realized that that's one of the things that I really enjoyed the most. And so that's where I need to put like more of my time, more of my effort. And I think the crazy thing is I gave God a list of things that I wanted to create in my life, a list of, like my vision for my life. And he really said, all right, let's work on you. And he had to take out a lot of things that I didn't know were there and do a lot of work in me. And but I'm definitely seeing a lot of these things come to fruition, and I am truly grateful for it. So this episode was longer than I expected, and I shared way more than I expected. I kid you not, I turned on the camera and I was like, I'm only going to talk for 20 minutes. I literally turned on the camera and I was like, this is going to be a 20-minute episode. And I have roughly 90 minutes to cut through right now. So I'm going to end it here. I just wanted to come back and have like a little chit chat, which turned out to be a big yap session. But I hope you enjoyed this episode. It's different from all of the tips and stuff that I've been talking about lately. And it's one of the things that I've been thinking of. Like, I just want to yap. I just want to yap again, like every now and then I'll have tips for y'all, but today I just wanted to yap. So let me know how you enjoyed this episode. These are the 6 things that I learned. Number 1, just to give you a brief recap. Number 1 is becoming the best version of yourself is quite literally an identity shift. That's where it starts. If you don't change your identity, it will not work. You will just be in a cycle of inconsistency and feeling guilt and shame and feeling bad about yourself because nothing is changing. So it starts with an identity shift. And I do have a program called Upgrade Your Standard where I help you do that and become the best version of yourself. I will leave the details in the description. And the second thing is you have to face the ugly parts of yourself. The third is it's about removing the things that make you a shell of yourself so that you can be your authentic self. Number 4 is you will go through a season of isolation. Number 5 is stay detached and do not cling to anything but God, and don't let anything dictate your emotions. Learn to find peace and joy regardless of your circumstances. And the last but not least, the 6th thing that I learned is you are going to know what is truly important to you. Your priorities are going to shift. You will be a completely different person if you do it right. If you focus on the internal work and not just like an external glow up, You can always add that. You can always put on some makeup, do your hair, and look nice. But like, do you want to look good and have a bad heart? You see what I mean? Like, so these are some of the things that I have learned. And yeah, that's our yap session for today. Let me know how you feel about this episode. That is all I have to say today, and I will talk to you next Sunday.